Hi, everybody, and welcome to Friday Night Flock Talk. I'm Robin Sullivan of the Leather Elves. I want to welcome you to make. If you can, there's a lot of different ways to listen to Friday Night Flock Talk. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and just tell your friends how much fun you have here on Friday Night Flock Talk. So tonight, we never know when disaster is going to strike. And right now, there are quite a few unfortunate situations going on. It's been a really rough week for our friends on the West Coast. And I know that Nick has been working diligently on the American Federation of Aviculture's disaster relief program. We are going to do a sale through the Leather Elves, and the benefit of that will go to the Hawaiian Feathered Friends Network. So if you enter the code Maui anytime between now and next Friday night, on our site, the Leather Elf site, you save 20% off your order, and 20% of that order also goes to the Hawaiian Feathered Friends Network. So they do need a lot of help. It's a horrible situation there, and we're trying to help as much as we can. And AFA is doing an incredible job. I know Nick has been working diligently to coordinate that relief. So if you are interested in helping out and helping yourself by saving 20%, order this week. Anytime it's live now, anytime between now and next Friday, enter the code Maui at checkout. You save 20% off your order, and 20% of your order goes to the Hawaiian Feathered Friends Network. Okay, so you don't want to hear any of this tonight. You don't want to see me tonight. Um, I have the great pleasure of introducing to you guys tonight Dr. Cromwell Purchase. So, Dr. Purchase is the director of the Association for the Conservation of Threatened Parrots in Brazil. He has been a key player in the Spix Macaw reintroduction project. I met Cromwell many years ago at an AFA, not many because we're both super young, at an AFA conference. I was telling him before you guys came on, I have Spix Macaw colored hair, did this on purpose. But as much as you guys would love to hear Dr. Purchase's bio, I'm going to skip all that and we're going to get right to the heart of things. How are you, Cromwell?
I'm very good, thanks. How are you, Robin?
I'm doing well, thank you. I'm excited to have you here. We've been working on this for a while. We've been
We
going back
have,
and
we have.
forth. When I sent you that message and you said, yes, I can do it, I was like, oh, okay, good, we're good. So I'm really excited to have you here. So um, I guess
I'm excited to be
the
here.
thank you. The first thing we need to do is let people know the story of the Spix's macaw, the history, and their listing, how they were listed as extinct.
Okay, so I guess if we start at the beginning, in 1819, the Spix was discovered by Baptista von Spix, and a specimen was then collected, and that was the first specimen. And this, I guess, started the process. He didn't label it right correctly, thinking it was a hyacinth, but later on by Wagner, it was labeled correctly. But then going further onto that, he did also state that it was a very rare bird at the time compared to the other birds that he was seeing as he was doing his expeditions. So the Spix has been sort of in the rare zone for a long, long time. It's and mainly due to habitat destruction by livestock. So farming in the region started around 300 years ago, and the increase in goats, the livestock in the area, that really destroyed the habitat. And slowly but surely, this species that really is a niche species for the creek systems of the Katinga just lost all its habitat. And then put under severe pressure later on by poaching. And that is what basically brought it to extinction. And in October 2000, that was the year when the bird went extinct in the wild. Spix were no longer. But the extinction wasn't really placed on the bird then. The extinction was only placed on the bird a few years ago, actually, I think just before COVID in the region. So that was by IUCN.
Okay. So it's been a long, rare journey, I would say then, it wasn't so at that even at the point where they were first discovered, they weren't very plentiful at that time either, correct?
Correct. So they share the habitat with the Spix, with the Maracana, Iligas macaw, blue-winged macaw, and they're more of a generalist, and so they were able to then cope with the changes that were happening to the environment. And even though their numbers did reduce tremendously in the Katinga region, they are found in multiple habitats around. So they weren't restricted only to these creeks of the Katinga and in the region. So they were able to survive more. And really, in the end, the only thing that saved the Spix was them in captivity and people getting together, organizations getting together, trying to collect all the Spix into the project and make the project viable for a potential re-release at some point. And it took 22 years for that to happen from its extinction. But in the end, it has happened, which is remarkable.
It really is. But so let's back up a little bit. How did you start working with parrots?
Well, I've been with parrots for as long as I know. When I was a little kid in primary school, I've always had a fascination for birds and animals. And I used to work at the SPCA on my weekends and my school holidays. And then there was a lady there that sort of ran a wildcare centre in my hometown, Richards Bay in South Africa. And so I started working with her at the wildcare centre. And there she had her own parrots as well as the wild birds and animals that she was looking after. And I just had a fascination for them then and just continued from there.
Okay. And so when did you become involved with the reintroduction project?
When I finished my PhD, I applied for the Blue Macaw Captive Coordinator position at Al Wabra Wildlife Reservation in Qatar. And fortunately, I got in, and that was where I started. So Ryan Watson, he was the captive coordinator at the time, and he was then moving on to do the more in situ work here in Brazil, and so he needed a replacement in Al Wabra, and they then hired me on to be that replacement.
Okay. So your history with parrots is a long one. So how did the project get started? Obviously we all want to we want to conserve species. We want to see that work happen. How did this project come to be?
Yeah, it was a very tough situation. There were a lot of, I guess, egos involved in all organizations, and the politics was massive. So you have a species that went extinct in the wild, and you have a few. Well, at that point, you had sort of zoo organization, Laura Park, and then in Brazil, you had Sao Paulo Zoo. So you have very few people in sort of the zoo world that had the Spix macaws, and the rest were all in private hands. So there was a lot of politics involved, a lot of issues because the people that had them in their private hands, where did they get them from? How did were they the ones behind the poaching, or were they poached by other people, and then these people just ended up getting them in their collections, like is what often happens. And so there was this not knowing whether you were now trying to coax a poacher into, a person, not a poacher per se, but the person behind the poaching into a project for conservation. So there was a lot of mistrust too within the situation. And so the beginning, I think, was very difficult. And especially with people that were working in the field, biologists, Brazilian biologists, etc., that were working in the field, and organizations like Parrots International, that were getting involved and things like that, and then the Brazilian government, of course, so ICMBO, IBAMA at the time, all trying to save a Spix. And they had to sort of see how do we do this without, and try and get rid of all this sort of hate or anger towards the people that in private hands that actually have the birds. And I think probably the most important piece of legislation that was put into place was to allow an amnesty for people that had the Spix, in order to then get the Spix into the program and then the person wouldn't be prosecuted for having those Spix. And this, I think, that was quite an important piece of legislation, and I think that also helped calm the waters a little and get people on board. And once the people were starting to get their birds towards the project, it opened doors and it sort of made a bridge. And so this was quite important because Switzerland had a lot of the Spix macaws, and then there were the Spix macaws in the Philippines. And so you had these large collections. And slowly but surely, over time, holders like the Swiss holder, Hammerly, he decided he wanted to leave the program. There was a lot of politics, and he wasn't interested in being involved in the politics anymore. And so he then sold the collection to another Swiss man, Roland Messer. And then later on, the Sheikh got involved, and he managed to merge the Swiss collection with the Philippine collection. And that put between 90 and 95% of the world's Spix population in one location, which is a huge risk. Mm-hmm. But it also opened the door to allowing for incredible research that could be done. Because when you've got such a large population in one place, the amount of research you can do and the results that you get is remarkable. And that pretty much is what opened the door to getting the population to produce as well as they're producing today, because it took a very long time to get the production going. When I started in the project in 2010, the population was just over 70 birds in the whole world. 52 of them were at Al Wabra Wildlife Preservation. And it goes from, they literally increased by 20 birds over 10 years. So you're looking at, it was less than 20 birds. So you were looking at less than 2 birds a year. And that just wasn't sustainable for you to even look at a conservation project where you have a release future. And thanks to research like artificial insemination, doing all the semen analysis, etc., hormone analysis, we were able to get the birds to a point, and obviously genetics. And genetics is very important. Sao Paulo University was very important in that aspect of the genetics. And so being able to do all that research, get all that done, and have a big population to work with, we managed to then increase the breeding population. And now we're producing 50, 60 a year, whereas in the past you couldn't even get 2 a year. So thanks to this massive boost in the population, we now have a release, and we have individuals to release.
So, like you say, there's a lot of politics involved, and the breeding a lot of times there is a lot of politics involved as well with breeding birds that have been in a captive setting or in human care, and then having those birds for release. I know that has been an issue for several different conservation projects with parrots as well. So it's not just you throw the birds together. Contrary to popular belief, it's not like a puppy mill where, everybody's just going, okay, everybody get together and we're going to produce all these chicks. Walk us through what that process looks like, please. How you figured out to get to this successful point.
Okay. Well, with the captive breeding in particular, there were so many aspects, because you got to remember that we have a population that is genetically inferior to what we would like it to be. We have a very small population that we're working with, and fortunately, due to artificial insemination, we were able to increase the gene pool really as much as we could, which was great. And that also helped with our fertility issues. So we did have a lot of fertility issues. And the egg analysis that we performed, we realized that a lot of the infertile eggs, or the eggs that we thought were infertile in the early days, actually weren't infertile, and they were microscopically fertile. So there was such early embryonic death that you couldn't actually visually see fertility. We had to see it under a fluorescent microscope. And that's how we found out that actually many of the eggs were fertile, but there was a fatal gene that was causing an issue. And so that made us do some research with Cornell University. And we did the genome sequence of every Spix macaw we had. And that allowed us to get a closer look at the genetics, even closer than the microsatellite work that we were using from Sao Paulo University. And it also allowed us then to make our mixes in our breeding pairs better to allow for less of this early embryonic death and allow us to produce more birds. Also, the Spix macaw, they're not a difficult species to breed. Like other parrots, they have their little quirks, and once you've figured out the quirks, they breed fairly easily. And we've all, the people that have been involved in the Spix and have worked with the Spix, we've worked out the quirks fairly well, and are now able to breed them pretty easily. The next aspect is the hand rearing. So obviously, because the Spix were so important, and each individual Spix macaw was crucial and needed to survive when you're only producing 2 a year or less, in order to keep this population going, you couldn't lose a chick. So every single chick was hand reared. And this also then created a problem for the parent. Those eggs are taken away. And also, in order to decrease the chance of getting infections, diseases in your nursery, you would take the chicks away when they're in the eggs. You wouldn't let the chicks hatch under the parents, because if there's polyoma or anything in the population, you bring that into your nursery, then you lose all your chicks that are in the nursery. So this created behavioral issues with the Spix, and it took a long time for us to then work that out of the system. And now currently, I think we've got 7 or 8 pairs currently at the German facility that are parent raising right now. At this very moment while we speak, they have chicks in the nests. So we're moving quite nicely past a great milestone. And a lot of thanks goes to Vladi, who runs the facility there in Germany. And he does, he watches those cameras almost all day, every day, monitoring the birds. He monitors their behavior and everything. An incredible job to help get us to this point. So getting some parent-reared chicks is a very important part. But in the beginning, it was all hand-reared, and even for the release, they were pretty much all hand-reared birds. And the key then is hand-rear for conservation and not for the pet trade. So there's a big difference between hand rearing for the pet trade or hand rearing even just for captive breeding than there is for hand rearing for conservation. Now, well, for release. And the important thing is distancing yourself. So socially distancing yourself from the birds. So when you're hand rearing, you try and hand rear multiple birds at the same time. So not a single bird, because if you have a single bird, it just sees you every time. There's no conversations with the birds. You literally walk into the room, mix the food. There's the bird doesn't see you until the food is ready. Pull the bird out, feed the bird, put the bird back. There's no talking, there's no social interaction or anything. And their social interaction is then between each other, because you're doing it with multiple birds. And this is very important, but even more important is decreasing the amount of space to wean the birds. And that was quite crucial. So we're currently weaning the birds at 70 days of age. And I know a lot of people don't understand that concept, especially people that do hand rear parrots of that size. But at between 52 and 55 days, I already put food in the cage for them to chew on and play with. And by 70 days, they're eating by themselves. And that is a very important part, which helps get these birds out in a fairly wild state. So obviously they're not wild yet. They recognize people. And so then the next step is to flock them in large aviaries. The larger the aviary, the better. The bigger the flock, the better. That way they interact with each other. They learn their behaviors from each other. And what I would do is I would have one older bird in the cage that I would send all my chicks to for that season. And that way, those chicks are learning from an older bird. So if they're learning from just each other, they often don't learn discipline so well. Whereas if you've got an older bird in there, the older bird teaches them the discipline side of things too. And this did, because I started that very early on in Qatar, and what this did was it decreased the breeding age of the birds. So before that, Spix macaws on average would breed between 7 and 9 years old for the first time. Now they're breeding between 3 and 4 years.
We're having a little bit of problem with the signal, I think. We've got a frozen and I definitely can't tell you all the
This this social action
Nick, are you having the same problem I am here?
reduce the breeding.
All right. I'm not sure, Nick, if I'm just not getting it or
No,
if...
it's not just you. It's we're just having a bad signal on where he's coming from.
Okay. All right.
Give him there he is. He's back now.
You're back.
Okay, I'm back.
Yay, that I was getting a little warm in here. I was like, I can't tell them half of the fun stuff that you can tell them.
No problem.
So I think well, for me, we left off where you had talked about the breeding age dropped. Okay.
Perfect. Yes. Okay. So this social behavior with an adult bird and with each other dropped the breeding age remarkably, which then also allows you to have extra years of breeding. So with the birds breeding younger, it means the generations are smaller too, which allows you to boost the population remarkably compared to if they only started breeding 7 to 9 years of age. So that was a big step, which helped us. And then when it comes to actually selecting the birds, we select the best birds. So the ones that have the best wild behaviors that we can get. And those birds then go to the release aviary and they then get trained in the large release aviary. All the birds are obviously trained with the native foods as well. So yeah, and then from the release, then obviously then they get released. Yeah, I think I've answered the question.
So when you wean them, do you wean them onto native foods?
No. So I do offer native foods, but I still wean them onto a standard diet because it is a lot easier to wean them then. But I do offer the native foods for them to actually taste and play around with. And as they now move into the release or into the flocking cages, they then are able to play around and start eating the native foods.
Okay. And I noticed, so there was a photo of the birds with enrichment. So obviously you don't really want them interacting with man-made enrichment, toys, things like that. How do you handle the enrichment side of things for them?
So yeah, as a whole, we try our best to give native plants, and many of the native plants that we give them, we give cuttings and everything in the aviary. They are generally plants that would give a flower, a seed, a fruit, something that they're able to. Thus, the interaction is then good for them. But we also use natural or homemade enrichment, because what we're trying to do is, so one of the most important things is in a release environment is supplement feeding the birds. So the thing is, when you've got a bird in a cage and it gets a food bowl and it eats out of that food bowl, it eats maybe at a maximum for 40 minutes a day. So it gets the food, if it gets fed twice a day, maximum it's 20 minutes per feed that it's actually eating. Problem is if this bird now eats for 40 minutes a day in the wild, it's going to lose condition and get predated on. Because in the wild, it needs to eat for it needs to forage for at least 7 hours a day just to get the food because of the increased energy requirements for flying around and finding that food. So now what we can do is we can increase the time that they're feeding by enrichment to maybe about 3 hours, 3.5 hours. But we can't get to that 7 hours. And so this is where the key comes in with supplement feeding. If you do not supplement feed them, these birds, when they leave, they don't understand that they have to forage for that length of time. So they forage as much as they used to. And by doing that, by the time they learn that they need to forage more, it's too late. Their conditions dropped to a point where they're weaker now, and a weaker bird is going to get predated on. So that is the importance of that. And for that reason, we do still use human-made enrichment.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. We're working on a foraging kit that offers different methods of foraging for birds that are in human care, just to see, because I try to tell people they don't all forage the same. And I'm sure, over your career, you've worked with a number of different species, and, some will forage on the ground, some will forage arboreally, it really depends. And I always tell people, companion parrot owners, that it's important to know how your bird forages in the wild so that you can offer things that mimic that behavior. So they're arboreal foragers, I would assume?
Well, yes, to a degree. Well, they don't generally look for food on the ground.
Right.
They don't, because they're not looking for rotten food. In the end, parrots actually want food that is not ripe yet. So they tend to be on the trees still. But the Spix macaw, the trees that the Spix macaw and bushes that the Spix macaw feed from vary greatly. So you have the cariaba, like in the image you see there, and that cariaba creates these massive pods that the birds will then eat the seeds out of. And those are very high up. But then you've also got piña, which is a little bush that can be not even half a meter off the ground. The fruit can be not even half a meter off the ground. And the birds then fly in there and forage in those areas. So you've got this vast foraging because they're in an arid environment. So, for example, maybe a bird in the Amazon jungle would only forage high up in the canopy, because that's where most of the fruits are going to be. The Spix macaw has to forage because in arid environment, food is very limited, and you literally have to go with the seasons, and the different seasons have different food availability at different levels, different parts of the Katinga. Maybe you have to fly 25 kilometers, 30 kilometers just to get to your next food source. So it is very different in an arid environment than what you would have in a more mesic environment.
Mm-hmm. So do the long distances that they cover, what, for a bird in the Katinga, what would an average activity budget be like? How much flying is done in a day? How much time is spent, flying to forage, flying to find those food sources?
It does vary from the winter months to the summer months, so from the dry season to the wet season. In the dry season, it can be a lot more flying for foraging. We see the Maracana's or the blue-winged parrots. They fly quite far, 20 odd kilometers to go and get food. Although they they'll get the food and they'll even come back and roost in the same place. So it's quite a bit of flying for them. But we've also monitored with the Spix macaws, although they stay very close to the area because we supplement feed. Individuals that we've had that would fly 20, 30 kilometers, a couple of minutes. And suddenly we'd have the signal, the next minute they're gone, and then we get a sighting and we go out there and they are 30 kilometers away. So they can fly huge distances in short periods. Their design is quite remarkable. They're not a stocky bird like the other smaller macaws. They're a very long and lean bird, and just watching them fly and watching them make their maneuvers in the air, it's so elegant. And I watched the blue-winged macaw, and I watched the Spix macaw, and the blue-winged macaw. When the predators come, they fly almost. They just bolt it. Whereas the the Spix macaws, they do all these aerobatic maneuvers. It's quite an interesting thing to watch and remarkable to see.
I'm sure it's interesting. For years, I've been talking to people about, things that are kind of hardwired that, when you talk about the aerobatic maneuvers and the foraging for distances and things like that, those aren't things that you've taught them. I mean, those are things that they just have learned.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the maneuvers in the air. So what we designed the release area was Tom White. He organized the release area, the design of the release area for us. It's in a U shape, and so the birds have, in the full length of the aviary, the birds have a meter flight path that they can fly, and they bank from the one side. They bank in order to get in there, and then when they turn around, they come back, they bank again. And that front area is a wide area; they can even fly circles in it. So that does help a lot, and it was always nice to watch them fly from the one side to the other side, and they did it quite regularly. And I think having that and having that amazing muscle build-up before the release, when they got out, they were already used to banking. And so then when using that and using the wind as the wind came, I think it was very quick for them to learn how to make these evasive maneuvers. And it's incredible. They fly low like a fighter jet and just swoop between the trees and the branches. It's quite amazing. Really, really nice to see.
There's a facility in Maine called Avian Haven that works with birds of prey, and they're so they do rehab, and their mews, their enclosures are it's a circle, and then when they get out into this flight area, there are walls that are a certain height. They have to fly up. They have to get that lift and get up and over. They have to go around, and it's very similar. It's that conditioning that you have to make sure a bird has before you release it, whether it's releasing for the first time or releasing back into the wild. So yeah, it's
Exactly.
amazing. It's just incredible the way they learn. So their food, what is their diet in the wild? Um, does it, and so that's part one of the question. Part two is, um, does the abundance of food uh, impact the breeding, how they breed? Oh, I have a silent screen.
Working on it. He is
That's all right.
connected.
That's fine. The reason I asked the question, and I'll ask it again, but the reason I asked that question for you guys out there who are listening is, are you back?
He may be able to hear you, but
We can't hear him.
right.
Okay. What would you suggest, Nick?
Well, we can give it a couple more seconds here.
Okay.
If you can hear us, Cromwell, if you can reload your page, that might be helpful.
So the reason I was asking that question is because I know with kakapo, the prevalence, there's a remove fruit, and that's what it's one of their primary food sources. And the breeding is directly impacted by how much food is available. So, there are years when, oh, you're back.
I'm back.
Did you hear me or
no?
I was asking, part one was what's their primary diet in the wild, and then the part two was does the abundance or lack thereof of food impact breeding?
Okay. Yes. So I guess the main thing is they have their main diet that brings them into condition for breeding just before the breeding season, and that a lot of that is was the Cariaba tree. So the Cariaba tree is a very important tree for the Spix macaw. It's a nesting tree, it's a roosting tree, but it's also a food tree. And in October, it flowers. And then a month later, it starts to create its fruits and its seeds. And it creates these massive with these sort of helicopter style seeds. And those seeds are an important part because that then brings these birds into condition for the breeding season. And so that it is an interesting little thing that I found living here in the Gatinga at the breeding center when I started with the birds here, is that I fed them all the different types of the food and that were available in the wild. And not a single one of them did they recognize. Not a did they eat from the beginning, except the Cariaba seeds. Now, none in the wild, none of these birds had ever seen any of this food that I'd given them when I gave it to them for the first time. And the Cariaba seed, they immediately took it from the plants, knew exactly how to break it. This is a very odd shaped seed. They knew exactly how to break it, and they knew exactly how to take the actual kernel inside out. Immediately. So the genetic memory, they clearly have evolved, and the genetic memory was still there after decades of being out of habitat and generations actually from the wild ones, which is quite remarkable.
That's amazing. That is amazing. It's and I think that's part of it, that genetic memory that we need to think about with birds in human care, birds that are, being held in homes and things like that, in private collections, and that there is still some of that there. And, I have people say to me, "Oh, well, no, I got this bird, from a breeder. It was bred in captivity. It's never been, it's never been wild. It wasn't wild caught." But there's still that piece that makes them, what they are. And I think we really need to think about that with our captive birds, is that how are we going to try to replicate some of that, try to make that happen in a captive setting. So it's just, there's the evidence right there that it does indeed happen. Well, look at they're getting a shower. Very cool. And I think we've lost you again. Oh, wait.
Okay, you there?
Oh, yes, you're back. Okay.
All right.
So I guess, okay, so we've talked about, getting them ready, doing the breeding.
So
Can
about the
you just,
genetic memory, can I add one more thing?
sure.
And that was the one I wanted to get to, was where it froze, was that predators, so avian predators. So all people were worried about them, and people were worried about them recognizing them as predators. And it was very easy to tell that immediately when a shadow flew over the aviaries, the breeding birds would all make a call. They all knew it was something that they needed to worry about. And so recognizing that a bird of prey was actually something to be wary of was not difficult. That was easy. The problem is, and this is where the aspect of danger comes in, recognizing it is one thing, knowing how to avoid it is the other. So you've got different kinds of birds of prey in the area, and all those different kinds of birds of prey, hawks, falcons, etc., they hunt differently. And so the birds have to learn which birds of prey they have to avoid in which way, and that is the tough part.
Okay. The genetic memory, when you talk about that, with parrots and birds of prey, I was at an event where we had a bunch of parrots that were under a tent. And they did a barn owl release because it was a rehab facility. They did a barn owl release, and as the barn owl came over the tent, every single one of those parrots was alert and aware. And those, again, were birds that had never seen anything or experienced anything like that before, but that information was there, and it's kind of fascinating. So, all right, so we've got them healthy, we've got them breeding. Can you describe for us the release and I'm gonna put you on the spot here, the feelings that came with that?
Okay. So we'll talk about the release first. And the release itself, the biggest challenge is the fact that we were releasing birds that had no teachers in the wild. And this was obviously a big concern. And we did a lot of work working with the Iliga Macaws, the Macaws, and getting them. So we took some out of nests. We hand reared them the same way we hand reared the Spix that we were releasing. So everything was done the exact same way. And we then integrated them into the population that we were releasing. So we had them in the flocking cages. We had them in cages next to each other, not together. We saved putting them together for the actual release aviary itself in order to have sort of a social bond, but not we didn't want a strong bond between species. We just wanted a social interaction bond. So we had the Iligas in the one cage. Next to them, we had the Spix and the flocking. And a very important aspect of this was when we put this, so when you hand rear a bird, that bird creates its own language, but that language is different to the wild bird's language. And what we did was we caught a wild adult female and we put her into quarantine and we brought her into the flocking collection with the young birds that we hand reared. And the first thing that we noticed is that when we had Iligas in the flocking aviaries, there were no wild Iligas coming to visit them. The minute we put a wild one inside that aviary, every day we had wild Iligas on top of the flocking aviaries visiting those Iligas that we had in the cages that we hand reared. But also another remarkable thing is we could hear the change. The female taught the young Iligas her language. And so you could hear the changes in the sounds that were coming out of the birds. And she taught them the language. And she also taught them which of the native foods to eat. And in doing that, the Spix were in the cage next door and they were watching this all happen. So then when we put them into the release aviary all together and feeding them all the birds, the food that is found in the native habitat, that Iliga and the other Iligas that were eating that, and the Spix were seeing this, and they were like, "Oh, that's interesting. I'll investigate." And so that was a very important part to the release, and it actually worked a lot better than we even could have dreamed, because when we did the release of the Spix, the Iligas were the first ones to fly out of the release aviary, which we expected because they were interacting every day with wild Iligas. So it was much easier for them to then actually fly out and investigate because they had sort of friends outside that they'd been communicating with that were waiting for them to be released. The Spix took a bit longer, but what happened is the Iligas flew out of the aviary and they did circles, they circled around and they came back to the aviary. And then they would go out and they'd circle and circle again and they would come back to the aviary. And they would keep coming back to the feeding stations that we had. I put feeding stations on either side of the release door. And this flying around and coming back, it coaxed the Spix macaws, which were a lot more cautious because they didn't really have any Spix friends outside, so it coaxed them. So it coaxed them to the door and coaxed them to actually essentially then fly out. And that first flight that was captured so wonderfully by Tim Flack in his photography. And it was, I don't know how to explain it. It was just, it's an amazing feeling. It's like a pressure off your shoulders. You're sitting the entire time, you've got all this pressure on your shoulders, and then the birds fly out and they hop onto the feeding station and then they go for their first loop. The emotions were definitely quite
I'm sure.
I don't know what the word is, quite large.
Well,
it was a very emotional day.
Oh, I'm sure. It's just sounds absolutely incredible. And when before we went live, Cromwell, you said that when you get up in the morning, tell everybody what you see when you get up in the morning.
Well, I'll go one step further and make it even more emotional. So after the day of release, it had been a very long day, and in fact, it had been an incredibly long week, where it was a lot that needed to be done and put in place and everything for the release. And so we were all very tired and hardly slept the night before. So we wake up in the morning at 4 o'clock and get everything in place. People arrive and everything, and the release happens. So you're a lot more emotional when you're tired. And then finally, the day's gone by, the birds are out. You're worried about them because it's going to be their first night potentially out of the aviary. And although most of them did go back into the aviary for that night, but the next morning when I woke up and I opened the door to get out of my house, and I walked out, the first wild bird I saw was a Spix Macaw, which was quite remarkable.
Oh, I can't even imagine. It sounds like, fairy tale land. And the fact that all the work that you guys have put into this and the team has put into this and to have, such success. So what's the current status? Where are we now, or where are you now?
Okay, so we've released 20 birds. So the first release we split into 2 releases because it was a first release for the species. We didn't want to release all 20 in one go in case something happened. You never know. So we released 8 in the first release in June, and then we released 12 in December. And in doing that, what we really did was we split up birds that had sort of paired themselves in that release aviary. And what that did was it created this strong base for the birds that we released, because you bonded, or you have a bond with the birds that are in the release aviary, because you grew up with them, you flocked with them, you potentially bonded with one as a potential future mate. And so it gave us this ability to keep the birds very close, which is very important in the beginning. And that was crucial to the whole sort of system. And so then in the end, we managed to release 20 by the end of the year. So far, out of the 20, we have 13 that are still around. We had two that have flown off and never to be seen again. And we had 5 that were predated, which is one of those things, and we know it has to happen. Now, we were supposed to do a release again this year in June. And unfortunately, because the plan is to release 20 birds per year for the next 20 years. And this release this year was crucial. And the first releases, or the releases that come subsequent to the first release, the first ones are very important, because what you need to do is you need to maintain that base and allow it to grow systematically, because obviously you've got predators in the region and there will be predation. So you've got to be able to maintain. But due to avian influenza in Germany, we couldn't get the birds in time in order to do a release this year. But also the birds that were in Brazil, there was a lot of politics involved in getting the birds that were here to our facility in time, and unfortunately it couldn't happen in time. But Martin, our president of ACTP, he has already got the next set of birds ready, and the avian influenza scare is over in Germany. So we will have our birds to release for next season. So we're very excited about it. But so we do have 13 birds still running smooth and doing well. We have also got pairings in the wild. So we also have nesting happening in the wild, as you saw from that video there. There's nesting in a natural log. We also have artificial nests up, and we currently have a pair nesting in an artificial nest in one of the Cariaga trees. So it's very exciting, because to have that in the first season is remarkable. We most certainly didn't expect it, but we are not complaining. So yes.
Oh, that's such wonderful news. It's the fact that there may be that next generation happening in the wild. I mean, that's what's so exciting. And we talked a little bit about the politics and it's, I mean, any big project you work on, there are going to be egos, there are going to be the pitfalls that you come across, and you have to meet those challenges. And I think you guys have shown that despite all those kind of challenges, you've been successful, and I really want to commend you. And I'm sure everyone, if you, some of the comments here are that people are inspired, and it's so impressive, and bravo, what a feeling. And I think that's a tribute to you and your work. And it's it's pretty intense to realize that this was a bird that was y- on the brink or extinct, and now it's flying the skies again. So exciting.
Yes, the locals have this little saying that they so the Spix Macaw, the voice of the Spix Macaw has returned, and that's sort of what they sort of their way of communicating that they're happy and that the Spix Macaw is back, is that the voice of the Spix Macaw has returned to the Katinga.
Oh, that's so beautiful. So just, we're almost at the end, but as far as the locals, supportive of your project, or how do you guys work with them? Because I know that's critical with any kind of conservation project.
Yeah, so we have a sister company called Blue Sky, which is doing the land restoration in the area, and that company does a lot of community work. I'm not heavily involved in community work because I'm spending so much time on the farm. But we also have ICMBO, which is the government government um, conservation organization that um, is involved and do a lot of the community work too. So the community work is massive, and it has to be, because if the community is involved, then you have people. There's always, wherever you are, there's always a few people that are against the project, and whether it's related to farming because they worry the birds are going to eat their corn, or if it's related to not liking the people involved and the organizations involved. So there is one or two people that are against it, but the majority of the region are extremely happy to have the Spix Macaw back.
Well, we all are too. I mean, it's just such an amazing success story, and it's an ongoing success story. It's not at the end that, okay, we release them and we're done.
Oh no,
The
this
future
is a
plan.
20-year-long project from
Nice.
now.
Very. So just in closing, Cromwell, what would you suggest to people who want to be involved with conservation, want to help if they can, not just with the Spix's Macaw program, but just conservation in general? What would you suggest to them?
I think one of the biggest things um, to help conservation organizations do their work, other than financially, is to share their posts. Social media has become a massive thing, and in the end, the most important thing is to get the word out. Not just any word, but the correct word. So, like for example, where there's so much jealousy about this project, people that haven't been able to be involved because of certain things, and they spread vicious rumors and all sorts of things. And in the end, word gets out that things are not the same as what is actually happening. I think the key is to look at the partners involved. So look at the Brazil government's ICMBio websites, what they're posting. For example, so whichever project you're looking at, look at the people that are actually on the ground doing the work. Look at the posts they putting out, because those are the people that actually know what's going on. Spread the word, because that is how those conservation organizations are able to see how their success is pushing through in social media. And it's how everyone can see what they're doing, where they're doing, and what they need and when they need it. The more they post what is needed for that project. So I think in the end, social media sharing is probably your strongest
trees, or
exactly.
building it, being in a harness to get up that tree, or building any big aviaries. It just takes a click on social media. So we can definitely do that, and hopefully everyone who's listening will help with that, with your program as well. So I want to thank you for all your work, for putting up with me messaging you 1,000 times so that we could get this done. And I want to wish you all the best moving forward. So thank you, and hopefully we can have you back in a few years, and we'll be talking about hundreds of Spix macaws.
Thank you very much. It's been lovely. It's been an honor, and I hope that will happen.
Take care, and we will see you soon.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good night. This has been amazing for me. It's such a wonderful success story. I just want to remind you all, if you weren't listening at the beginning, or you weren't on at the beginning, we are doing a promotion through the Leather Elves with the help of the AFA Disaster Relief Program for our community, our parrot community in Hawaii and Maui. If you go to our website, the Leather Elves website, and enter code MAUI, anytime between now and next Friday, you will save 20% on your what you order, and then 20% of your order will also go to the Hawaiian Feathered Friends Network. So hopefully we can get some help going that way. I know that Nick has been working. There's already food going, and we've got he's doing a wonderful job getting that to the folks over there in Maui. So it's a tough situation. A very, very sad situation, but hopefully we can help a little bit with your support. So I want to thank you all for being here tonight. It was great talking to Cromwell, and hopefully you guys learned some things about the Spix's macaws that you didn't know already. It's a wonderful, wonderful project, and share that social media, like you said. And we will see you guys in a couple of weeks here on Flock Talk. Our next Flock Talk will be on September 1st. So we will see you then. Watch Facebook, the Leather Elves page, and my page. I announce it on my page, and the topic will be there. The promotion will be there, and we'll let you know who's going to be on the 1st. So take care, everyone.